This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 398, D9 book. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we are talking about the D9 book with Selwyn Polit. Selwyn has over 3 decades of experience building and designing software applications. He is a passionate proponent of open source development and has been working with Drupal since version 4.7. Currently focused on back-end Drupal development for progressive, mission-driven organizations and businesses. He's originally from Cape Town, South Africa, and he lives with his son in Austin, Texas, United States. Selwyn is interested in psychology, permaculture, and a little woodworking, which at one time included building Indonesian, Japanese-style tea houses. Before I move on, what is permaculture?
I'm glad you asked. We can have a long discussion about that, but essentially it's a sustainable design system, all about where you set up systems that include animals and plants and water and all the elements in a way that works for the planet and works for people and produces some sort of a profit or a feedback for everyone. Leaves things better than when you started.
That's a lot bigger than I expected. Yeah, cool.
Sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna have to look into that. So welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hello, everyone.
And joining us for the third week, Jordan Graham, senior developer at Atten Design Group. Welcome back.
Good morning.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's bring in Martin Anderson Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. This week, we're going to talk about Cloudflare Worker Purge, which allows your site to use the Purge module to do tag-based cache invalidation on Cloudflare using Cloudflare workers. Now, the module was created in April of 2021 by David W. Barrett. It has a 1.02 version available, which works with Drupal 8, 9, and 10. And it's officially marked as maintenance fixes only, but it has had a couple of releases in recent weeks. It has officially 4 open issues, but actually 2 of them were resolved in recent releases. So really there's only 2 open issues, neither of which are bugs. Now, according to Drupal.org, it's in use by 6 sites currently. And really the way the module works is by doing tag-based cache invalidation on Cloudflare using workers as opposed to the standard Purge API. Reason being that the Purge API can do tag-based cache invalidation, but really requires an enterprise account to be able to do so. And so by using Cloudflare workers, which are available even on free accounts, it means that you can set very long cache lifetimes for your Drupal site, but still be able to ensure that fresh content is being served as soon as it's published. So I came across the site a couple of years ago when I wanted to start using a CDN with my own site and didn't want to spend any money. And it's been working really well for me for the last 2 years. So I thought it would be interesting to share as just another way that using open source software can help you to save money. So anybody have experience either with this module or maybe with other solutions of working with Cloudflare and Drupal?
I mean, I've certainly used Cloudflare with Drupal and without it. I've used Cloudflare workers before, but I'm going to have to look at this module. I'm curious, do you have to create the workers yourself and then kind of tie them together, or does it kind of just auto configure them and push up?
So I'll say from my own site, I basically just set up more the Cloudflare connection and then installed this module. It didn't seem like it required a lot of setup, but also possible that there's better ways to configure it than I've been doing it so far. There is also a blog that the the module author actually wrote on his own site, and I'll add that in the show notes if anybody wants to do some additional reading there as well.
Yeah, I've used the purge module and the Acquia purge module, and for one client we did some stuff with Fastly as the CDN, and we were doing all kinds of fun cache invalidation. I think it was Drupal 7, and it was an experience. Sounds cool.
Yeah, one of the big problems with tag-based caching in Drupal 8 was, I personally think, kind of revolutionary for
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Drupal application. But one of the problems with external caching systems is that they generally rely on path-based caching.
Exactly.
And doing the conversion between when something is a tag in Drupal to find what all those paths are can be really, really problematic. I mean, I think there was one site where if you updated one particular entity type, you would get 5,000 paths. And that's just too many. At that point, you want to do like some sort of like just purge everything. And I definitely have worked on a few projects where it's like you just do the math, like, okay, if it's more than 2,500 URL or whatever the number is, wherever that threshold is, if it's more than X, just purge everything.
Yeah.
dump the purge queue in Drupal, or find some sort of common factor. If you don't want to dump everything, if you have hundreds of thousands of paths, right? But that once you get to that edge case, these types of tools really do make that a lot easier than having to do that custom work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the tag-based caching in modern versions of Drupal really has been a major step forward, and it's great to see some of these kinds of tools that make it easier to leverage that. Again, not just within Drupal itself, but with some of those, external platforms.
Yeah, it's good to see more support, even if it's a little bit of a workaround. Well, as always, thank you for a great Module of the Week, Martin. See you next week. And moving on to our primary topic of the week, let's start with a simple question. What is the Drupal at Your Fingertips D9 book?
Well, essentially, it's a collection of things that I've learned. Basically, a quick and easy, hopefully, way for you to find techniques to get to Drupal solutions as a developer. So it's a website that lets you find little chunks of code that will help you solve problems for everyday things that you do in Drupal, and maybe not so everyday things, where you might normally go look, oh, I think I did that in this project, and go dig through some templates and dig through some code and find the right hook. I try to put them all together in a way that you can actually go find these things quickly, yank out the code, jam it in your code, and go.
I feel like a good example of that is the form API reference that Drupal.org has. It's a big table of all the different render or form API types and has some documentation around that. I feel like sometimes that occasionally moves like sometimes you Google for it and it's right there, and sometimes you Google for it and it's like, wait, why isn't this the top result?
Right.
This book feels like that to me, but for significantly more topics, and it stays in one place. I mean, I know the form API reference hasn't really moved, but I really have over the past 10 years of using it. Sometimes it shows up in the first search, sometimes it doesn't. It's like I feel like, why do I have to look for this?
Right.
It should just be easy to find.
Yeah, and I've tried to organize it, the way I want to find stuff. So it may not be the way ever anyone else does, and I'm certainly open to rearranging. But it's like, oh, I need to do a redirect. Well, go to the redirect chapter, and with the latest update to the theme, which is using just the docs for theming the thing, it now has search capability at least. So, so yeah, like I want to do something in email, I want to do something with forms. You can definitely quickly find it. I even have a chapter called Learning, which is really about, is about finding information about Drupal. What are the links to good blogs and articles? Where are videos that you can find? Keeping up with the news, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So hopefully that's useful.
So I'm wondering when you started the book, but I'm also wondering, like, why start kind of started as a book as opposed to just starting a blog?
Well, I should say, a 500-page Word document, which is basically the source for Drupal at your fingertips. And every time I come up with something, I should remember that, I jam it in there. And, I don't have any care for, really organizing. It's pretty haphazard, and it's kind of grown over the years. I have one for various topics, but probably like most of you, you have some way of keeping notes. I've tried Notion, I've tried NVAlt, I've tried all kinds of different things, and I just kept gravitating back to that Word document. But then I thought, well, if it's useful for me, I suspect it's useful for other people. And it seems like some people, it's gotten before the little API that was counting page views. I had hit something like 10,000 views on the home page. Now, I'm not discerning between crawlers and such like, so I don't know for sure that that's actually people, and it does include me going to it as I'm updating things. So I don't know that I've done that 9,000 times, but it's possible. But yeah, about a year ago, I decided I want to, I would like to make my mark on Drupal. I don't do a whole lot of code contribution. I've tried, haven't quite found my niche there. The level of sophistication of some of the Drupal core stuff is just incredible, and it's like, oof, I don't really know where to sort of start. And so it seemed to me like, I just heard this story again and again. How does a Drupal developer work in Google, or now possibly in Chat GPT to some extent, right? So I thought, let me put it together and try to have it in a meaningful form. And it is also is a great way for me to clean up the notes, because 500 pages of Word document is, as you can imagine, it's a mess.
Yeah.
So when, like, how many years has that been curated over, right? So, like,
since since
D8. Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean, I have a D7 version as well, but it's much sloppier.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So-
So over the last 5 years?
Probably so, yeah.
Am I doing that math right?
Didn't it come out in 2016? So that'd be 7 years.
7 years.
Wow.
Okay. Well, that's why I was looking at you, Nick, because I knew that if I was wrong on a date, you were going to be right there.
And we did our first Drupal 8 prediction show. When was that? I have to look this up. That would have been it's been almost 10 years, I think. Yeah, episode 81, Drupal 8. It's been 310 episodes since our first Drupal 8 episode.
Nice.
So it's been a while.
This show's about the D9 book, not about us.
Yes. No, please. This is fun. It's nice to hear. I've been listening to you guys for a long time, back in the days when Stephen with a PH was leading the charge. And
man, I hope he's still listening to the stream, because he will get a kick out of that one. Stephen.
So Selwyn, you started with the Microsoft Word document, and then put it into a maybe more useful format for other people to share, or to participate in. How long did that process take you of like developing it into something usable by others?
Well, it didn't take too long. I mean, of course, I wanted to make a Drupal site out of it, right? It's like, it's got to be a Drupal site. It has to. How could it not be a Drupal site? And then it's like, how do I make it editable and contributable, and and I sort of experiment with that. I want to say maybe a month or two of futzing around, and then I found GitHub. That whole, what do they call it? That whole system where you can do the book and such like, and so I found that. And actually the biggest challenge has been the theming part.
Really?
Trying to make it look workable. Is a few iterations. I think Nick, when you and I spoke some time back, you saw it in the previous iteration, right?
Yeah.
And it was sloppy. It was super sloppy, and things fell off the edges. And I mean, I am not a front end guy. I can make websites work. I just can't make them pretty. And so it's been a while, but it's also evolved. And as I've been doing this over the last year, I feel like I've kind of hit my stride on style. So there are older chapters that they really need a little love, but I feel like the newer chapters, as I'm bringing them on, the style's been a little more consistent, and the code's been more complete.
Nice.
Thanks.
By the way, just a quick aside, Stephen is still listening. He said you made his day.
Oh, nice. Hi, Stephen.
Okay, so one of the questions that I have then is, why is this book online only? Have you considered making it, printing it and selling it?
That's a great question. When I started it, I reached out to people, specifically Matt Glarman, who had written a Drupal book, and he's got a new one, right? The Drupal 10 one. I have it.
He'll be on the show in a couple of months, actually.
Oh, nice. Anyway, and we talked about that. I was like, what does it take to write a book? What's involved in writing a book? Because I've seen these Drupal books throughout time. I also spoke to someone, what's her name? Kristen. She was involved in one of the older Drupal books. Oh, her name's escaping me now. Anyway, and I spoke to Phil Norton, who is a blogger, Hashbang Code over in England, and was asking them, because like Jordan, you were asking, like, why isn't it just a blog? And so I was asking, like, what does it take to do a book? And Matt was saying to me, yeah, you have to find a publisher, and then the publisher puts limitations on you, like, some publishers say you can only do so many steps. What on earth is that? How is that significant? How is that relevant? I mean, it just seems kind of crazy to me that you would limit it to, well, you can only do 7 steps if you're saying, what happens if something takes 27 steps, which in Drupal, I know that never happens, right? So bottom line, it seemed like, and he was saying, look, this is an open source project. What about if you did some kind of web thing and then get on LeanPub and maybe do something that you can generate some, people can download a PDF version of. So I've started that process. I haven't gotten very far. Frankly, it's not as satisfying as just doing the web stuff. The web process is very smooth, and people have started doing merge, pull requests. There's a fellow over in Ukraine, and he's like, let's do a whole new cron chapter, and he merge request, and it's beautiful, and just merge the sucker, off you go. And someone else is like, oh, you don't have an email chapter yet. Boom, wrote a quick email chapter and pop that in. So I mean, this to me is kind of the whole open source thing, and what makes open source so interesting. And I was listening to your podcast recently about employee owned. That's the ESOPs, yeah. And it just that seems so much in sync with like this whole open source, sort of. Anyway, I love the whole idea of open source and that people can contribute to this, and I hope that more people will contribate.
It makes it a lot easier to contribute to, right? Is what I'm hearing. So.
Yeah, really, it does. And again, back to that question of why did you choose this format? Because it's so easy to contribute. We'll probably get into that later as we as we progress here.
Almost feels to me like it needs some sort of on-demand printing option where like you could get the latest version of the book, right? So like, hey, I got the first version, like the first run. It doesn't have an email chapter or cron chapter, but like if I got it today, it would have an email chapter and a cron chapter, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Like
I think that's
for
what
somebody
Leanpub-
that's like somebody that's like likes a printed version of things, you know.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that's what Leanpub does, right? Like you can
Exactly.
provide updates. So, like this is open source and people can contribute, but it's also not. It's a lot of effort still, right?
It is.
To put together. So I think it's fair for you to find some way to be compensated for it, right?
Yeah.
It does become a question: how do you compensate the people that have contributed significantly as well, right?
Right.
But Leanpub provides a way to say like, hey, this is a valuable resource for me. I'm going to contribute in some way monetarily, but it's also a way to like get the more updated version as it comes out. Because if you purchase a paperback or a hardcover, I don't think there's ever been a Drupal hardcover book, but you purchase a paperback, you're not, it's not going to be updated when something changes, when Drupal 9 goes to Drupal 10 or when a new chapter comes out.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting question for sure.
And like you say, and like when you buy paperback, you always have to get the errata and go and mark it up or print out the errata sheets and for the mistakes, because everything's got mistakes. But yeah, that's a really good question too about that was one thing. It's like it says by Selwyn Polit, it's like, well, it's not just me. I mean, now there's been quite a few people editing. I mean, Phil Norton got on there and he did a whole bunch of formatty stuff. And so
you need to add a like and friends caveat there, and then just have a page of all of your friends.
Right. Well, I have I think in the opening chapter, I think on the homepage I have something about that, and then I do have the very first chapter is called attribution. So everyone that's actually contributed, I've added them.
I'm in there.
Yep.
I see it.
Yep, you're famous, and yeah, like Chex. He's kind of a famous Drupaler. That's Karoli Negiesi. That's his real name. That's Chex, CHX. He got in there and started editing some stuff up. Yeah,
Nice.
I mean, it's like it got the attention of a few really interesting people, and so yeah, it's starting to. Like I say, it seems like it's starting to get some traction. Every time I put out a new chapter, I go promote it. I do a post. Hey, check out the latest thing. On a whole bunch of different places.
So let's dive into that a little bit. How often do you work on it? How often does a new chapter come out?
So I work on it almost every day, because as I'm working, I think of things. So I have a big to-do list, and I'll either put something in the to-do list or I'll write some piece of code for something, and I'm like, whoa, that would be really good in the book. I should add that, and just fire it up, 5 minutes, add it in there. I would normally be adding it to my Word document, so it's no trouble just to add it to this, because the editing it's Markdown, and it's it does the code formatting and everything, and so it's pretty quick. So if you look at the bottom of every chapter, you'll see page last modified, and so you'll get a sense for how often things are being updated. As far as new chapters, that's usually a weekend project, and that generally takes the better part of a weekend for me to crank one of those out. I'd say, maybe once a month those happen.
Have you considered putting that to-do list on the project, or in the issue queue for the project?
I have not considered it. I like that idea though, because I do have an issue queue, and yeah.
It might be helpful for people looking to contribute but not knowing where to start.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, some of my to-dos are kind of, in XYZ project, I did this kind of thing. It'd be really good to have that in the right in the book. So, and I'm curious if you guys have had a chance to look at it. Does it look like it would be a useful thing? I mean, what do
Oh
you
yeah,
think?
I went straight to the dependency injection sections because I think that's super useful. And I like how you have, services broken out from plugins, and so I went straight to that and found the variety of information that I was expecting and hoping to find. It's not just one broad overview. You've got some sort of special cases that and very direct examples, and it makes me wonder, just from I think that's super useful. What would you say is the most useful part of that in the book that you've put together?
They're all my children. I have no favorites.
Don't we though?
Yeah.
Sorry.
When I was deciding what to do with the book, I kept getting pulled to writing like basic sections, like the basics of the form API, right? And how do you use the form API? That's not my dog; she's in her cage. Anyway, so I kept getting pulled to, like, am I writing this for someone who doesn't know Drupal? Am I writing this for someone who does know Drupal? And I really settled on, I'm writing this for Drupal developers. Okay, people who know Drupal, people who maybe need to just be refreshed on a particular section or just looking for a particular solution. But then I had these big sections that I'd written, like in the forms section, I have this whole, the basics of the forms. Forms need this, and this. And so I started, and that's one of my to-do issues is to move those basics to the end, to the bottom of the chapter. So the basics of the form API. So I was pretty pleased with the way that one came out. The Ajax stuff, that was a labor of love. There's a lot of work went into that, because in some cases, I actually went and wrote code to make sure these examples would actually work. And so that was a real labor of love, for example.
Yeah, how to trigger Ajax from different field types and things like that, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So many variations, right?
There's so many edge cases too with Ajax that just, like, I recently found out that certain Ajax events just don't fire correctly when attached to a node form versus and I haven't opened an issue yet because I haven't been able to quite track down what is happening. But like, I have Ajax code that works in a custom form and I move it to a node form and it just doesn't work.
Right?
Like the events just don't fire. I need to try to dig that, find out what that case is.
It's not unlike the batch API. The batch API, you fire it off differently if you're in a controller, or if you're in a drush command, or if you're if you're running it from a unit test, if you're running it from a form, all these different circumstances.
But before I get back to what you were going to say, Jordan, I have to step in here too and say that the batch API was one of the chapters I used as a litmus test to check your work on some level.
Nice.
Because one of the things that I found frustrating with batch is that a lot of the not the documentation, but a lot of the snippets on the web around the batch API are wrong. They have it written in such a way that the entire batch executes immediately when it's instantiated. But the way people write most of their batches, like, they don't actually need a batch API. Like, they could process it in one go, right? They're writing a batch to be future-proof, but they don't catch that. And I had a project once that I was working on, and when I was running it locally, it would work. But as soon as I went up to the staging server where there were more limited resources, and it actually had 500,000 things to process again, it failed. I was like, the heck? And then I dug in. I had to dig in a lot more into the code and documentation. I found out every single example of the batch API was executing the entire thing immediately, and then just creating a progress bar, and nothing was happening during that period. But when I read through the batch API section of your book, it was right. So
good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah,
it gave me a lot of confidence.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it worked for you. That's awesome. You think you'll go back to it when you next do some batch work?
I think I actually did, because most of my a lot of the batches previously I had been running in a module file, and I recently moved a lot of that stuff to controllers, and then I took the next step and moved it to just straight up services. And when I did that, I think I used your book for that, for examples. It was very helpful.
Cool.
Okay,
so
back to you, Jordan.
So Ajax and the batch API, that's all super useful. What's something that I know you've seen like a really broad spectrum and documented a broad spectrum. What's like the most obscure thing that you have in this project?
Most obscure? I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I don't know that I really do. I mean, I guess maybe I run into I run into Drupal developers that have never seen Xdebug before, and
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I can't imagine. I mean, I'm an old C programmer from previous lifetime, and there's just no point in programming if you can't step through code, in my mind. And so like the debugging section has like obscure things like how to debug drush commands, stuff like that, which with DDEV, you have to SSH into the container and then run the right version of drush in the vendor directory in order to get PHP Storm to pick it up. And so maybe that's one of
that's pretty obscure.
You like that one? Okay.
Yeah, I do. I really do. Yeah. I feel like contributing some VS Code Xdebug, configuration stuff, because I saw the PHP there and I saw DDEV there, and I was like, ooh, maybe there's something I can bring in.
VS Code makes it way easier to get Xdebug working with DDEV. It's one of the reasons why I switched to DDEV.
Yeah, actually, PHP Storm has become super simple. I mean, it used to be such a pain to get it set up, but now you just fire it up and it works. So yeah, it's it. And I imagine I don't use VS Code, but I do use it to edit. I do use VS Code to edit the Markdown sometimes. So that's kind of interesting. Neat.
My next question is, I think I've actually talked about this on the show before, but it's always been kind of like a long-term dream of mine to write a book on Git, because I think it'd be interesting to see the dynamics of contribution, and not so much a technical book, because I think that you're seeing the benefits of being in a technical sphere, right? People are used to Git, and I think the ramp up for people contributing is a little bit lower. But I've always thought it'd be interesting to write more of a, science fiction or fantasy book, right? Because your branches or your forks are no longer like, oh, I'm just, adding this feature, adding this. Like, it might be a whole different story arc or something. And
wow.
So I've always been curious about what it's like to write a book with Git, and you're kind of a bridge to that journey. So what has that been? What has that been like?
Is
it different than like a normal Git project, or is
No, it's exactly like every other Git project. It's fantastic. It's awesome because I can really screw something up and roll back. Not that I've really had to, but having the confidence that you can is really, really nice. In LeanPub, they have a writer where you can just start typing in on a blank screen. And then they also have the ability where you can use Git to feed your material. And so like that's a really interesting situation that I'm thinking is going to make the LeanPub version so much easier. I've started the LeanPub version, by the way, but essentially, I think maybe once a month, I could copy all the files over into the leanpub, into the leanpub directory where I've got that
Okay.
repo, and git diff. And just like PHP Storm's got this great merge tool, which visual merge, and just see what changed, and just include that. Include that. No, this is the formatting stuff. Don't add that. And so it should make that process so much easier. I think. Yeah, the rest of the world, when they find out what we have in the form of Git, we'll be very jealous.
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
mean, one of the things that made me think of this is a long time ago. One of my first clients was an author, and talking to her about her process, and she had 35 Word documents on her
Yeah.
desktop, like version 1.1.2, and she
Yeah.
had 3 thumb drives with backups all over the place, and Google, and it's like you've got a 400-page novel just in Word, like that,
Right.
just like, and you have like all these different branches of like which way is the story. I think she had like kind of like a mystery novel, so it's like
Yeah.
you have to be very careful not to like miss a plot point or something in that case. I'm
Right.
like, how do you like keep track? Like you like, oh yeah, this idea that I started exploring and didn't work 2 years ago, now it
Right.
does work. Now I have to find which Word document I'm working on. Whereas if you have branches, you can just be like, let me check out that branch.
Right. You have
And
the
it's like,
Xavier killed Martin in the library branch.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And that's what kind of started that thought process. But
Interesting.
um, yeah,
I,
I was fascinated to see
that,
a more technical book make that
I,
jump too.
it seems like someone should have solved that problem, right? I mean, I think if authors knew that was even a thing. I mean, I've known people writing books, and it's just a Word document, and yesterday's version is gone, and today's version is now what you have.
Yeah,
But I love the idea of a branch for a plot point. Hey, we're going to explore, how would the book work if the train crashed, or the
yeah,
train was derailed, wow, or if the spaceship, took a quick zip around the planet,
yeah.
happiness.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Also, for things like, one of the things I was thinking about is like, because I was thinking about the process of writing a book when I was talking to that client. So this is a bit of a diversion, but um, for the first time in my life, being an avid reader for a long time, I realized like when you write a book or a book series, you have to have a lot of metadata about that book as
Right.
well. Like, who are all the characters? What are their wants and desires? What are the things that they absolutely will not do? What's their morality? What, that kind of stuff. So that when you're as they evolve or something, like being able to track that history too, I think would be fast. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but anyway, we can
That's neat. That's really neat.
we can get back to the show
Oh, no,
topic.
I'd like it.
So my next question, I think we already kind of covered it a little bit, but I'm gonna bring it in from a different perspective, right? So just listening to the last, I don't know, 5 minutes of you and Nick talking, I resisted the urge to push my glasses up quite a few times, and I think like Git is a very interesting way to write a book, right? And I think what you guys are talking about makes a lot of sense. Like, hey, I want to diverge this way down this branch, or diverge that way down that branch, right? But I think where it has issues, right? Or at least where I see the issues is that you two gentlemen happen to be very technical folks, both writing code for a living. So like Git makes a lot of sense to you, right? So the accessibility for the average person, right? Or even the author, because like at its core, right? I feel like an author is really like a creative, and all they want to do is get their words on a page so that somebody else can like edit them and print them and like get them out to the world, right? So this is a really long-winded way of me saying or asking, as a Drupal dev, right? Are there any plans to maybe move or bring Drupal into the mix in a way where Drupal maybe ingests what's the markdown in the Git the Git repo and allows for maybe greater accessibility to folks that don't necessarily want to check out a Git repo to make changes to this. But then also maybe provides you some way of sharing this or pushing this book out in more, an easier way to something like LeanPub. So kind of like as a distribution method, maybe.
Yeah. I guess the short answer is no. But I've it really killed me. And every now and again, I've like when I get on Reddit or something, people are saying, "Huh, a Drupal thing that's not on Drupal." It definitely feels there's a kind of it feels wrong, right? It feels like, but there's that whole theory, right? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
I don't know that it feels wrong though, right? So you're providing a great service, and you're doing it in a way that is easy for you to actually get to the achievable end goal, right? Like I, as a solutions architect, I am a firm believer that Drupal is not the right answer for every solution, and sometimes
You're
can
wrong, John. You're
overcomplicate.
wrong. You're so wrong. Of course,
Well,
it's the right answer. Remember,
that's
we love
fine.
Drupal.
I'm a Drupal lover, and like I can agree with that because I'm a Drupal lover, but like sometimes it just makes things complicated, right?
Totally,
So
totally.
like I think for your use case, right? You are a developer, you know how to use Git. Like you can easily, like, as you've illustrated, Nick was able to, commit to the book. Other people were able to commit to the book. Like
I need to clarify, I didn't commit to the book. I provided some snippets and I think an issue. I don't remember that I did a pull request.
Did you use Git to do that?
Oh no, I did do a pull request. No, I did. And then you cleaned it up after. No, I did. Yeah, it was actually very easy.
Right. So like
between like 20 minutes.
The Git thing is working, right? Like I'm not saying like, hey, we should move this to Drupal because like it's going to solve more problems. It probably will add a layer of complexity. I was just curious as to like if that was something you were thinking about, and if it was a way for like more people to be able to like edit and provide feedback, and then maybe a distribution point. But it doesn't sound like it is.
Well, the thing I think that kind of I think will answer your question a little better is GitHub's implementation of this of Git from a UI perspective means you don't have to fork a branch. You don't have to know anything about Git. You just basically go click on a page and you click the pen and you start typing. And when you're finished, you essentially click create merge request. Now, obviously, regular humans don't know what merge request means. Sure. But if you see it once, and I think that would be a great idea for someone to create a little recording screen video or something like these are the steps to editing a page and creating suggestions. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I used GitHub has a facility where you can put comments. If you look at the bottom of every page, there's a comment section. Mm-hmm. And so people can make suggestions in the comments, and they just basically become issues directly on GitHub. You do have to log into GitHub, so you have to go through that experience, but they become issues immediately, and there can be a little threaded discussion happening there, which is super cool. I'm not sure. Is it issues or is it? It's discussions. That's what it is. They call it discussions on GitHub, which is something I didn't really even know existed. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, when I'm working on a chapter, I'm on my local machine. I do a pull from the repo. I fire up VS Code. First of all, the whole process is quite involved, but I use Pandoc to convert Word to Markdown, and then I load up the thing in VS Code, and then I have a plugin that generates a table of contents. Don't have to use that anymore because the built-in theme does the table of contents now for me. So you have the ability to do that, all that crazy stuff that you want to do, rollback versions, everything you get. But GitHub, I'm really impressed. I think if people give it a try, they'll be very pleased at how easy it is to make changes.
I think this is a great, I think GitHub for what you put together is a really good platform. I remember hearing about the first time anybody used Twitter to write a novel. And I was like, boy, that's, I
Wow.
guess it could work, right? But anyway, yeah, I think this is a really good platform to use to write the kind of resource that you've written. And so I know that this began, with your notes on how to do the things that you found, that you would turn to frequently and so on. And now we're migrating sites to Drupal 10 these days. So what sort of updating are you doing, or do you plan to do to, in light of Drupal 10 coming along?
Right. Well, I regret calling it D9 book terribly, because in my mind it's modern Drupal book. The project I call D9 book, because there's already a DrupalBook.org project out there. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's absolutely beautiful, but it's incomplete. Someone did just a gorgeous, well formatted, beautiful book, and then it froze sometime in the past. But yes, absolutely. As soon as I'm doing more Drupal 10, which should be coming along pretty soon, I'll be updating everything. I mean, generally the move from 9 to 10 is pretty painless. It's not like 7 to 8 or 4 to 6 or something.
Sure,
absolutely.
Sure.
So definitely, I do call it a Drupal 9 and 10 reference, because I think pretty much everything in it should work fine in 10. And speaking of that, like one of the sections that I've never done, and I feel like maybe someone should do, is the custom entities stuff. Just haven't found a really good reason to use custom entities, and that could be probably a whole podcast in itself. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, every time I go to use a custom entity, I mean, they have their uses, but it's like there's just so much boilerplate that you have to create for it. And in most cases, things like storage or paragraphs, match it. I mean, I think if you truly are using it as kind of a like a glue piece, and you really don't need a lot of other stuff around it, it's a good fit. But
well, we're working. I'm working on a big project right now. It's a kind of a big voting on curriculum for textbooks and all kinds of things like that. And we had this whole discussion a couple of years ago. How do you want to do this thing? Should we do custom data type, binary files? Excuse me. Should we use custom entities, or should we use nodes? And just kept coming back to, when this thing's running and something goes wrong, because there's never bugs, right? We're going to need to be able to quickly edit things, and the node interface lets you get in there and do it. And granted, views will read custom entities, but it's kind of, if you're going to go the trouble of doing custom entities, why not just use nodes? And nodes are pretty crisp, and so we went with nodes, and boy, have we not regretted it. Just absolutely the right decision. This is a client that changes their mind every 5 minutes, and is scaling from 25 concurrent to 200 concurrent logged in users entering data. So interesting caching stuff there too, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, that's it. Maybe we can do a show on that in the future. So I'm curious about, over the last 6 months, we've really seen kind of a huge rise in natural language AIs, like ChatGPT and such. Have you used any of those tools with the book? And if you did, how?
Yeah, great question. I got very excited about the AI stuff and immediately tried it out. And so I thought, well, why not use ChatGPT to write a chapter or write the book? Or so basically, in the routes section, I have a section. I have an area down the bottom called "Getting Some Help from ChatGPT," and I haven't looked at this in a little bit, but basically, I've got the script that I did. I said, generate a Drupal 10 controller which displays a table of temperatures from 0 to 100 degrees in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. and boom, it generated a controller, and then I said, and then it added a thoughtful addition. It said, to use this controller, you'll have to define a route, and it gave me the route. And then it concluded. It said, you could define this route at such and such. So, that was kind of fun. And I think I asked it to write a few other paragraphs, and I've used it, here and there. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, those of us that have been around for a minute used like Eliza, the first effort of trying to get a computer to talk to people back in the 90s, and wow, this is just amazing. I mean, I have absolutely thrown coding problems at it, and it's generally come back with some pretty good stuff. The best part is the iterations, right? You say, give me a controller that does this, and then you say, but I want to be able to add this feature, or I want to be able to do this. Then it comes back to something to say, but no, I want to make a service of it now, and boom, boom, boom. Oh, you need this, and I mean, it can absolutely do it. It's kind of staggering. I think it's just gonna make our lives so much better. Definitely is interesting for this purpose. So
yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, I would say, this is true in general of AI in its current state. You do generally have to be somewhat of an expert in whatever topic or at least proficient in whatever topic you're looking at when it comes to this kind of thing, because it will still spit out things that aren't really accurate. And you need to know,
right,
especially since, you need to know when it's accurate, when it isn't, but it can generate a ton of boilerplate for you that you don't have to type out.
Exactly. I mean,
saves a lot of time.
Yeah, they hallucinate, which is kind of interesting. And then you point it out to them, it apologizes very, very politely, and it's, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Let me try that again.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing, but very impressive.
What about other AIs, like, for example, GitHub Copilot? Have you looked at using that?
Yeah. So with this big project that I'm working on, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, I installed Copilot in PHP Storm and started using it. And it's made coding a really interesting game. I'm not a gamer, but it's made it a really interesting game because you go to the, you can start you write a function, right? This voting app is very function heavy, just incredible numbers of functions, getting statuses of things and calculating things, and so you start writing a function, and it suddenly suggests 10 lines of code of what it thinks you want next, and I'd say 4 or 5 times out of 10, it's spot on. I mean, it is spot on. You just hit tab, like read through the code, and like, yep, you got that right. And of course, it hallucinates, just like ChatGPT does regularly. And sometimes it just comes up with complete nonsense. But it's really an interesting game. I find I know people talk about like imposter syndrome and stuff, and sometimes for writing books, like even the Lean Pub people have done this. When you're writing code, sometimes you have doubts, and it's like, what should I do? And Copilot will just jump in at that second and go, you should do this, and it's crazy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy, because often it's spot on, and it just becomes this really fun game instead of getting mired in the thoughts, oh boy, what would happen next? What should I do next? It just goes, Go ahead, Jordan. You look like
it's got confident suggestions, and what I've enjoyed about Copilot is as I begin to write a block of code, I can enter a comment,
right,
describing what I want to have happen next. And like you were talking about, like it sort of comes up with stuff. It's a good test of am I naming my variables and field names in an intuitive way that that makes sense to other developers, because the tool will just throw out, assuming that some variables and field names are what you would expect. And it's like, yep, I named that correctly. Yeah, I kind of come to see that.
Nice. Yeah. Have you tried the thing where you can do //q dot and type a question and do //a dot and wait, and it will answer it for you?
No, I have not
Yeah,
tried
you could.
that.
So
Oh,
you get interactive questions, and
Really?
it will just
top of
answer the
my
question.
list for today when we get
Right?
done with this. Yeah,
There's
for
an
sure.
obscure thing. Q and
There it
A's.
is. That's right.
Uh,
Q&As in
yeah,
Copilot.
I
Hmm.
should add that to the book. I need an AI chapter maybe, but yeah, I think we're on the edge of a. I chatted with a guy who's a great techie recently, and he said we're on the cusp of the singularity, and it's like, ooh,
Mm,
that's some
mm,
interesting stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
mm.
There's been some news. I mean, one of the top AI researchers at Google resigned yesterday, saying that it's going to be out of control.
Yeah,
And I'm not qualified enough to really speak either way, but it's certainly going to be disruptive. Um,
it certainly
Nick,
has
just
been
out of
disruptive.
curiosity, based on what you read or saw or heard, what was control? What did that look like? Was he saying like the fact that everybody is going to develop AIs, or the fact that the AIs would be out of control?
um, it was a lot to do with kind of two levels that I saw. One is the speed. He said, especially even 5 years ago, he assumed that there were things that we wouldn't reach as a race, human race in AI for 50 years, 60 years. And he now sees that being more likely 5 years away,
Yeah.
which is significantly more accelerated. A lot of it was around, um, how do I put this? AI is moving a lot faster than our ability to understand and regulate it, more so than most technology. And
Mm-hmm.
you can already see the way that its confidence is purporting things is causing problems. So, for example, you can see it, yeah, it's better for you. I'll see if I can find a couple of articles on that and we'll post in the show notes. But it's something that he's raising alarm like, hey, we need to understand this better before we fully release this tool.
I-
There's also go ahead, Selwyn.
well, I was just going to say that I think the the problem is, like, in the US particularly, we haven't figured out any kind of rules about any laws for protecting people's privacy and protecting people's data and these kinds of things, and it's really going to accelerate those areas. If you thought there's an echo chamber that will send people into doing really crazy behaviors because that's the way they get some variant thought that runs them down the road, well, the AIs are going to just really ramp that up if we don't have some kind of laws in place. I thought Elon Musk was really thoughtful about this some years ago, when he still seemed to be much more reasonable. And he started, he was involved in OpenAI and stuff and talking about how it could be dangerous. But the other thing is that they've now figured out, and there are lots of people doing this, they've figured out how to feed the output of the AI back into it. So, write me a controller, and it comes back and it feeds the controller back into it and with sort of the request to optimize, improve, make it better, do some variation on it. And there's something about that, computers can do things crazy fast. um, but I think it's more about people's understanding and people's willingness to legislate thoughtfully. But there are discussions.
I think
Yeah.
it's funny, and we can move on, but I think it's fun. Like, I think it's funny that everybody thinks like AI is some like magic, right? At the end of the day, it's still written by developers and potentially influenced by like their biases, right? And like the fact
Well,
that
that
what you just said, right? Like, it can learn from itself. So like,
Mhm.
if I'm interacting with an AI and I say, well, that's not technically right, it should be like this, the AI could say like, oh, well, okay, so next time I give this to somebody or I do this, I may factor that in, right? Good.
that's part of the problem. That's explicitly part of the problem, though, John. It, like what you said, is AI is affected by the biases whether they're good biases or bad biases or
Well,
intentional biases or
right.
not. And there's no, for example, there's no rule to try to show like how do you expose that? Like how do you know if an AI has some sort of bias that you're not
Right.
aware
You
of?
have you have
Right.
no, like, it's a black box almost,
Yeah.
right? Because you have no idea of like what the
And the developers don't sometimes.
baseline is, right?
Right.
And then how that baseline has changed based on the information that it's gathering as it's doing
Yep.
things. So it's like, and I think that's where you're coming from, Nick, is like, and maybe where this person from Google was coming from is like, we're moving too fast, and there are going to be people out there that are like, if AI can do it, let them do it. Let's push
Right.
it forward, push it forward, push it forward, and like that could be dangerous, right? That could be like, that could be detrimental.
Well, John, I have to disagree with you, though. It is magic. It's completely magic. I mean, I've coded for a long time, and I do not have any clue what's going on in that code. I mean, I haven't actually looked at source code for this stuff, but I've spoken to several people, and as they say, all it is something that predicts the next word. Now, and apparently the breakthrough, one of the main breakthroughs, although Sam Altman, I've been watching a podcast of, where he was interviewed recently, says that there's breakthroughs every week now, every several times a week. Really, the core of this is that it's just predicting the next word. And how on earth can predicting the next word make this thing understand, my South Africanisms, when I ask it to write a controller that,
so it's kind of funny because, like, I don't know, I guess it is kind of magical because nobody really understands it. And that's part of like the moving too fast, but it's also not really magical because people have been predicting what other people are going to do and say for like years, like hundreds of years, right? Like, think of your local scam artist. Like, he knows that if he calls you with a child crying in the background saying like, oh, I need this information, you're going to be more likely to give it to him because he's like, oh, there's a child crying, like, oh my gosh, like
the urgency.
he needs it very quickly, right?
But that's a human, John.
Yeah.
This is a computer. This is a piece of software.
And yeah, exactly. And if you take that to the next level, John, like robocalls are the bane of my existence and probably most listeners. But now, and I'm generally pretty savvy with that kind of stuff. But now imagine if AI starts writing scripts and finding like instead of like having to robocall everybody, they really find like this person will fall for this thing at this time. This person, like, they just
Right.
become.
That's
and if you have all the data,
dangerous. Right? That's the dangerous aspect, Nick, and the aspect of where we're moving too fast, right? Because again, at the end of the day, somebody is coding that. So some human is coding that, right? But where it gets dangerous is where some human codes it to build its own code that goes unchecked.
But no,
right?
you don't have to. This thing, you can have it write. Like Nick was saying, you can ask it to write code. You don't have to be the coder anymore. I kind of disagree with you a little bit, Nick. I think you do have to be an expert. I think our jobs are safe. I think because I don't think they're taking our jobs away. But these things write software, and in the hands of complete rank amateurs, they're convincing this thing to write viruses.
But that's what I'm saying. Like,
okay,
it can be built to write its own code, and in which case then it becomes a problem because it's basically moving unchecked through wherever it lives, right?
Yeah.
So like, I guess my point of like the person calling you, right? Like somebody could code that interaction, right, and make it seem like it was a real person, and then build it to write more code to like adapt the interaction based on every interaction it had, right? So you can always build a better, machine. Anyway, we have totally circumvented the globe of this topic right now.
We needed you on the ChatGPT episode a couple months ago. But
that was a fun one. I enjoyed it.
I was just going to say, so you have used ChatGPT, you have used GitHub Copilot, and go, Nick, with your next question.
Sure. So as we start to move to wrap the show up, I did have a question. Do you have any plans to expand the scope of this project a bit? For example, documenting more of Symfony, documenting Guzzle, maybe tools that the Drupal community uses.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
maybe more for Drupal specific use cases, but still not quite Drupal.
Yeah. So the reaching out a Drupal chapter does have Guzzle. I've got some Guzzle stuff in that. I think obviously Symfony is sprinkled throughout. And actually, someone just contributed recently. What was that they contributed? It was the Ukrainian fellow. Oh, yeah, in the cron chapter. I call these chapters, but section, I guess. He put some stuff in about what the Symfony pieces are that that cause cron to work. So yeah, definitely, and I think it makes sense to add more of that sort of stuff. I mean, there's such magic, and I also, of course, have references in the learning chapter to some of the video training and stuff that Symfony casts, I think they're called. They have some really good stuff on Symfony. I think I have referenced linked to them and stuff. So another thing I've done, just speaking of links, is I've tried when there are links that are dated, I've put the last date that they were updated, so that when you're looking at the references section and you're looking at the links, you can pick if you feel like you want to look at something old or something newer. I know that's probably a nightmare to keep updated. But some sections, I think, like someone wrote some stuff on how to do some batch API stuff from 2018, and so I put, last updated November 8, 2018 or whatever. And I'm thinking that's a really useful thing, because so often when you Google stuff, it's just all over the map what you find. And so I try to give people a little bit of direction, and myself too.
Interesting.
Yeah. So let's see. So you mentioned a little bit ago that if somebody comments on a page at the bottom, there's a comment form at the bottom. You have to log in or create an account on GitHub in order to comment, and that becomes an issue for the project in GitHub. I just forked your repository because there's something on testing using Cypress that I want to bounce off of you and see if you find it useful.
Cool.
How can people contribute or get more involved in the project?
Honestly, create an issue. It's essentially a UI thing. You do have to make a user on GitHub. Just get in there, click the, find the chapter you're interested in. If you notice a mistake, or you notice something that you think could be worded more clearly, or this kind of stuff, please feel free to go click on the pencil and go and make the change that you want, submit it, and I'll be able to see a diff, and generally I'll approve them. I want to have the problem like that Linus Torvalds has, where he's now got thousands of people contributing to the thing, and it's almost a full-time job just maintaining his well, for him it is a full-time job, I'm sure.
I'm chuckling because as you guys were talking about this, I was looking at the cron page because you just mentioned it, and I noticed a typo. And
good.
I created a pull request to fix it. Literally, you just have to be logged in. You click, there's a link at the very bottom of the page that says edit this page, I think in GitHub. You click that. If you're logged into GitHub, it brings you to the page. You hit the little pencil icon, you fix the typo, and then there's a form at the bottom that says, create merge request with this. And
crumb. Look at that.
Yeah. So if you're especially if you're doing something just like, tweaking something that already exists, I literally did it as you were asking that question, Jordan. It took me maybe 30 seconds. It took me longer because I wasn't logged in on the browser that I clicked the link on first. So I had to log in, but it took like 30 seconds.
I merged your change.
Oh.
It's fixed.
Just like that.
I had one follow-up question, kind of related to something we talked about earlier. How do you, just before we close, how do you figure out where to put something new? So for example, there's a little snippet, and we can walk through another live demonstration. There's a little snippet that I wrote on a project recently that was significantly harder to do than I thought it should be, just because I couldn't find any documentation. And that is, I had a client that wanted to update the label for the URL field on a link field. So the link field is one of the
for a URL on a link field. Okay.
Yes. So I think by default, if you create a link field, a link is one of those special fields in Drupal.
Yes.
It's a compound field. The first one is you can put in, a relative link, an absolute link, or you can do an autocomplete for, content on the site, for example. There's no easy way to change that. You end up having to do a field widget form alter
No.
to get in there. And I could be wrong. Maybe there's
No,
other ways to do
you're
it,
probably
but,
right.
like, there's no template for it. It's not in the UI. Like, I spent longer than I'd like to admit trying to figure that out, and it was something that the client, we put off for a long time. But every 2 months they'd ask about it again. So finally, I was like, you know what? It's been a really long time. I have some time right now. Let me dig into it, and I figured it out. So back to my question: if I'm going to contribute something like this, how do you think about that? Where would you put that?
Well, it's links related, so I would put it in the links, aliases, and URLs chapter probably. But I would say the first thing to do would be search for some of the terms in the search field up at the top, and see if you can find anything that gives you a clue. I mean, what's your sense when you're talking about this? What's your sense of how you would categorize this thing? Like just right now.
I mean, now that you've said links, I probably would do that same thing. But my first thought would have been somewhere in hooks, because it's
hooks.
One of the hooks.
So if that's the case, I would put it in both places. Probably, I would put it in the hook section and the link section, because where's someone going to go find stuff? And I have several things that's the case. I've got things that are duplicated in the same chapter, because it just seemed to make sense from a flow perspective, but then it needed its own little section.
And last question, kind of where I was leading to with this.
Oh, yeah, good.
If we have a listener that has a snippet like this that they think might be helpful but don't know where to put it, is an issue appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. Please feel free to make an issue and pop it in there, and I'll be delighted. Or, make a comment at the bottom of a page if you think it fits there.
It's super easy. I just actually put in a pull request to change the title of one of the pages, chapters, maybe chapters.
Okay.
I think it needs a little bit of discussion, but the reaching out, I was suggesting that you change it maybe to hold on, let me look at
getting off the Drupal island.
Yeah, to kind of use the Drupal terminology there.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
But I wasn't sure, like the permalink, and then
what would
the file the file title. Like, I wasn't sure if we wanted to go that deep.
It'll have to be called Island then, right?
Outside Drupal Island, outside Drupal Island. I don't know. Anyway, there you go.
Nice. How was it? How was creating a pull request from? I know you're a technical person. Do you think it would take more than 5 minutes to show a? I mean, I had a friend who is a writer, and she'd never used GitHub before, and I had her do some proofing, and she created some pull requests with 5 minutes of instruction. She also didn't know Drupal.
It was pretty easy because I used the link at the bottom of the page that said edit this, and then GitHub kind of walked me through forking it, and then walked me back through putting in a pull request. So obviously I was familiar with that process, but it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Selwyn. This has been a fascinating discussion. And it prompted John to contribute back to the project. So that's always
excellent.
A joy.
Thank you, John. And you contributed some more too.
Yep.
And
do what I can.
And Jordan forked it too with some ideas. So we're all, maybe Martin will do so. Martin, Stephen, well, if you're still listening, it's your turn now. Does Stephen still do Drupal? Stephen with a PH.
Yeah, he does.
He's doing Drupal behind the scenes.
Good.
Always. Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. Okay, so if our listeners want to get in touch with you, Selwyn, what's the best way for them to do that?
You always do ask this at the end, don't you? Selwyn Polit, generally everywhere. Evil Twitter, and you can find me on Drupal.org, Selwyn Polit, pretty much everywhere. So
awesome. And Jordan, how about you?
I'm CO Badger on Drupal.org. I'm not on Drupal Slack, but CO Badger on Drupal.org. Contact me there.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, as well as Drupal.org and Drupal Slack. And then you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Thanks, everyone.
See you guys next week.